All right, so we're gonna. So I started drawing some stuff out, which is really good because last night I prepared for the wrong class. I knew I had vascular this morning, and for some reason I prepared for the wrong vascular class. But it actually puts me ahead for that class, which unfortunately I don't teach for another week, but because we missed it yesterday. All right, so finishing up chapter 18. So this is like basically page 295. And Adelman. All right, guys. Oh, come on now, smiling faces, everyone. So, let's see, this looks so nice. The book doesn't mention arteries right now, but I do want to mention the basic anatomy of an artery. It has 3 layers. You guys, I don't know if you've learned this yet or not. I hope you have some introduction to this. This bottom blue line kind of comes into the innermost layer. And of course, these are red blood cells, which worked out perfectly with that one paintbrush. This is the tunica. Actually, I'm just going to write tunica up here. I only have to write it once. Tunica blank, we'll say. Tunica as in a tunic, as in what you wear, right? And so that's the innermost is the tunica intima. If you're going to wear your intimates, that's the tunica intima. That's the part, this is actually the part that is first involved with injury, and then plaque buildup usually occurs after an injury to that layer. And then there's a thick layer of, that's the tunica media, and this is where most of our muscle is. There's a lot of muscle in there. That's how we vasoconstrict, vasodilate. Those arteries get bigger and smaller. That's because of the tunica media for the most part. And then there is more of a connective tissue layer along the outside, and that is the tunica adventitia, I think. That's the outside connective tissue layer. And then I just want to mention one, not necessary for right now, but it's just good to remember that an artery is alive, and it doesn't receive its blood supply from the lumen. It actually receives its blood supply from little arteries and veins that go around the outside and pierce all the layers, and that is the vasa vasorum, and that actually feeds the artery. Now the vein has all the same things. In fact, let's draw a little arrows to these as well. So right to that layer, the intima, and there's a muscular layer right there, and there's an adventitia there. Just that on a vein, the media layer especially is much smaller. So there's not as much muscle in a vein, which is why veins are very compressible. If you ever have a vein sticking out, like in your arm or something, you could easily collapse that with the lightest of pressure. And that's actually an advantage. Veins aren't, it's not an accident that veins are like that. Because remember, arteries have a really high delta P, delta pressure. In other words, a change in pressure from one end to the other words, not to the other words, to the other. In other words, the heart. The heart is producing energy. It's moving that blood through the artery. Veins, on the other hand, by the time that heart energy gets to the vein, it's really non-existent. And sometimes the only thing moving blood forward is just an accumulation of blood at one end, and it's just kind of blobbing over. So the artery is pumping blood into the venous system, and the venous system's really very passively moving blood back up. It's not entirely passive, which we'll talk about. The venous system's not entirely passive, but on the most basic levels, I suppose it could be. Now this, and notice, by the way, I did not accidentally draw the vein, let's see, 1, 2, 3 times larger than the artery here. That was not an accident. Most of the time when you have an artery and a vein running next to each other, obviously they're going in opposite directions, the vein is much larger than the artery. Once again, artery's got high velocity. It doesn't need to be quite as large. Veins have low velocity, low delta P's, low pressures. And so by being larger, they're able to carry the same amount of flow, but at a much slower rate. So really an artery feeding an organ and the veins emptying out, even though they're much different sizes, they both have the same volume flow. And so let's just talk about that real quickly. I wrote Poiseuille. I think I misspelled it, but that's okay. Remember Poiseuille. So you have volume flow rate, delta P. Well, the arteries have great delta P's and the veins don't. Pi r the fourth, and I made that for pop. And anything up, anything up here, remember, anything on top, that goes up, volume flow goes up. And if it goes up to the 4th power, then it goes up exponentially higher for the volume flow. And of course, the opposite down here, H, just a number we don't worry about, length of the vessel and viscosity. In other words, your hematocrit, how hydrated or dehydrated are you, or how many red blood cells per volume of fluid is in you. So remember this R to the 4th though. And so that's how veins deal with a very low delta P. They're able to expand in order to get that higher volume through. And so when you're exercising, the heart beats faster, your arteries are traveling even faster. The delta P for the arteries is awesome, really moving that blood along, but still by the time it gets to the veins, there's not really heart energy left. And so in order to move that greater volume of blood, the vein, in essence, will reshape itself so that it looks more like, let's see, we'll make it a vein blue. Instead of that shape, the vein will suddenly pop open and allow more blood to go through. If anything doesn't make sense, guys, always remember to stop me. The other thing that veins do is oftentimes, like we'll see in the extremities for sure, instead of one artery, one vein, it'll be one artery or 2 or 3 veins doing the same thing. So they don't necessarily have to be huge veins. It could be multiple veins, but each one of them does the same thing.
I have a question.
Yep.
Maybe I missed it when you said it, but just to be clear, the names of the layers of the artery will be the same names for the vein?
Actually will be, yeah. Major veins, major arteries. Once we get down to venules, I think many venules don't even have, I'll be careful. I'll be careful what I say. I want to make sure I don't say something wrong. But yes, in essence, yes. Veins they are capable of vasoconstriction. One of the things that one of the last jobs, well, in the last few years of working full time up in Colorado, I was helping with, we were ablating veins that were kind of more harm than good. And so there's so many veins in the body, you could pretty much just remove a vein or purposely thrombose a vein. And that's what we were doing. We were sticking a catheter into the vein and using laser energy. And we were actually boiling the blood away. When I say we, I mean, I stood there holding something and the doctor did it. But, and sometimes what would happen is you'd stick, you try to get the catheter in, and the entire vein segment would just, you'd actually watch it. You could actually watch it turn from something more or less shaped like that to something more or less shaped like that. Totally can squeeze down. So veins definitely have that ability to vasoconstrict. And it's a good thing too. If you cut deeply into your arm, your leg, or something like that, you get arterial constriction to that area immediately, and vasoconstriction as well. Vasoconstriction. Okay, anyway. Veins act as a reservoir of blood. That's another important aspect of veins, is that they carry the majority of blood in the body. A lot of that is just simply storage, and then there's storage in certain veins are shaped as almost like little rooms, and we call those sinuses veins. And so the vein might be traveling along like this, and suddenly whoop, be really big. And that's not an aneurysm in this case, it's a venous sinus, and that's designed to carry all that extra blood. We have these in our calves, and that helps get blood. As our muscles squeeze, it actually helps move blood up into the larger vessels, and eventually back to the heart. Yeah, so veins act as a reservoir. Veins have to deal with hydrostatic pressure. Arteries do too, actually. Hydrostatic pressure affects arteries and veins, but it's much more obvious with veins. We'll talk about why. But in any case, hydrostatic energy is gravitational energy. It's potential energy. If we have a bucket of water on top of a pole, I tried to draw a door and a guy walking through it, but it became too complicated and I didn't have all that much time. So I decided on a pole. But if you have water up here on a pole, that has high potential energy, high gravitational energy. And I suppose a pole is a little bit different, but I suppose we could say hydrostatic energy as well. And of course, if you dump it out, that hydrostatic pressure will be noted on top of your head. So, what else do I have? Okay, yeah. So gravitational energy, hydrostatic energy, pressure, potential energy. Hydrostatic energy, by the way, is really the same as saying hydrostatic pressure. Same thing when you're under the water. If you dive deep, 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 well, if you dive really deep, you could actually crush your lungs. But if you don't go too deep, and you're in there swimming along, and for some reason you got a really long neck, your ears can pop, or your ears feel like you can feel all that pressure. That's hydrostatic. Hydrostatic pressure. The deeper you go, the more hydrostatic pressure it is. It's the more gravity, or the more the effects of all of that water and all the gravity and all that water pushing down on your ears, you start to feel it. So with hydrostatic, if you're standing, the heart level is basically 0 millimeters of mercury of hydrostatic pressure. This doesn't mean that you have no blood pressure at your heart. Of course you do. You have arterial pressure, but your hydrostatic pressure is 0. In your head, it's -30. Ever stand up too fast? You stand up too fast. Your body doesn't have a chance to deal with the change in of hydrostatic pressure, and that -30 suddenly makes you, well, let's see. Suddenly makes you don't feel so well. Below the heart, when you're standing, you could have maybe +50 at the hips, +75 at the knees, and 100 at the ankles. This is all plus hydrostatic energy. So in other words, your veins will be at the ankle. Let's say right here at the ankle, will have 100 millimeters mercury in the veins. The arteries, the book I think is a little too simplistic because the arteries are, they're gonna, if you're standing, they're gonna vasoconstrict a little bit, but the arteries, just theoretically speaking, maybe I'm wrong. Would be blood pressure plus 100 millimeters mercury. So if your blood pressure is 120 plus 100, you'd have maybe 220 millimeters mercury blood pressure at the ankle in the artery. So that's hydrostatic pressure, the weight. Yeah. The weight of gravity and all of that potential energy pushing down, and the farther down your legs you go, the more it affects. And of course, if you're laying down, theoretically speaking, if you're laying down, this guy is just laying there. There's his feet right there. Here's his little arms right there. It should be 0, 0, 0, 0. Because every section of your body is at the level of your heart. So the head, no hydrostatic pressure. Well, your hydrostatic pressure would in fact be 0. Your venous pressure doesn't, it's not necessarily 0, but it's close enough to 0 that we'll call it 0. So the hydrostatic pressure is 0 when you're laying down. So actually the best, we're always sitting down when we get our our blood pressure taken, we should be laying down. We really should be laying down, but just don't do that very often. Let's see. Let me just make sure. Heart level measured. Okay, and so, yeah, the other thing we need to talk about, and this is really important, is what our breathing does. And we've seen, no, you guys haven't seen this. Sorry, I get confused. Breathing. So I have here, should be a little more obvious. Let's do a nice purple. I have here a diaphragm. Every time we take a breath, we affect venous flow. Arterial flow is actually affected too, but once again, to a lesser extent, because the artery has the heart doing all that pumping, all that delta P. What happens with the veins with very little delta P are very much affected by our breathing. And so breathing is one way of pumping venous blood throughout the body, which is kind of cool. So this person is breathing in through his nose. That's why his mouth is closed, but he is in inspiration. Inspiration, breathing in. Respiration is breathing, inspiration is breathing in. And you notice that his diaphragm went down. Now, for some reason, this is, I really have to, like when I'm teaching in class, I really have to stop and think about what is it, which way is it going? Because if I take a deep breath in, not only does my diaphragm goes down, but my chest cavity moves out. And so for some reason, I think my chest goes up, I think my diaphragm goes up. No, it does not. My chest goes up, my diaphragm goes down. Now, what have we've done here is we create a larger space in this area. We essentially create, I need to get in closer, I think. We've created negative pressure. If you take a volume of space, or a volume of a container, and you make that container bigger, it's going to decrease the pressure inside of it, right? That makes sense, kind of makes a partial vacuum. And that negative pressure is what makes air. What color is air? Air is light blue. Go through the nose, down the trachea, and that's not chest here, that's air flowing into his lungs. Create that negative pressure. Well, that negative pressure that drew air into his lungs also kind of sucked air in through it from his arms, even his head. So did I say air? Blood. Venous blood is kind of sucked back centrally, and of course that obviously is going towards the heart. So when we breathe in, our upper extremities, our head, our blood, and our muscles of our upper arms and everything is sucked back to the chest cavity, which is really the same as saying sucked back to the heart. Now down here though, we have, if you take that, you take another closed container. So we have two closed containers here. One of them is our chest, the other is our abdomen. You make that container smaller without changing the amount of stuff in it, you're going to create positive pressure. And of course, we have what? We have an IVC traveling in the middle of our abdomen. That's going back to the heart as well, but with positive pressure, we've essentially taken the flow of blood and stopped it. Flow of blood in the legs is stopped. So when we see this, our other class is doing extremity venous Dopplers, and when our patients breathe, the venous flow undulates, and the patient takes a deep breath in and holds it, the venous flow absolutely stops. So I'll say stopped or at least slows down. But if they take a deep breath in and hold it, then it's stopped. And that's one of the things we do in order to kind of manipulate the blood flow for our own good. So let me just say this again, because this is not always easy to think about. Take a deep breath in. We've made the chest cavity has increased in size. That causes air to rush through his nose, down his trachea, into his lungs. At the same time, while that negative pressure is created, blood preferentially comes in from the arms and the head. By creating a larger chest cavity, we've made a smaller, we've made a smaller abdominal cavity that is increased the pressure because you're squeezing everything in there just a little bit. That increase in pressure has either slowed down or stopped blood from the legs. But the good news is we have to take a breath. And so here's our guy. He's breathing out. The diaphragm relaxes. It relaxes. It doesn't. When you forcibly blow out, you're not using your diaphragm to forcibly blow out. You're using your chest wall muscles, but it relaxes and kind of bows more upward, like shown. It comes up this way. It's not very bright. Let's make sure you guys can see the arrow. And then let's see, like nice. And he's now blowing COVID-19 all over the place. But what does this cause now? This has caused the chest cavity to get smaller. When that got smaller, the pressure increases. And of course, that's pushing the air out, but that's also slowing the blood flow down. So I'll just do this again, kind of a stop. Blood slows, maybe stops. But pressure here, we have negative pressure. Negative pressure, especially if we've forcibly blown air out, then we really get negative pressure. And at that point, blood flow from the legs increases. So blood flow speeds up coming out of the legs. And that's really helpful when we're looking at leg veins to be able to use a person's breathing to help manipulate the blood flow, and we can tell whether or not they have a DVT, which is really why most of the time why we're doing leg veins. Well, that was actually pretty simple. I'm afraid I'm going to run out of material today. We'll probably have to just talk more Doppler. Maybe we'll actually start talking more about. Well, we'll see. We'll see. That was awfully easy. Does that make sense, guys? How this all works?
Yeah, the little guys helped it out a lot. Little drawings.
Yeah, the little superheroes are cute.
I like the superheroes. They're sitting there with their hands on their invisible hips and blowing out freezing cold Superman air from his super
It's either
diaphragm.
that or they're asking, does this breathing make me look fat?
No, he's this guy's well, he skipped leg day and arm day actually. Okay, well, cool. All right, if you're following along, chapter 19 Doppler. Now, like I said, we've really stepped into this already. So, and once again, we're still only going to breeze over this because I don't want to go too far. Okay, Doppler shift. Okay, so Doppler shift. I have drawn, by the way, I have a cop over here. You can't see my hands. We have a cop over here and a cop over here. Does not matter. I mean, it changes things a little bit on our drawing, but does not matter. I've already told you guys that 100 times, so let's not keep beating a dead horse. Let's just use this shift. This car is coming directly at the cop. This is a positive. Well, we're going to describe a positive Doppler shift. And yes, Doppler radar is Doppler. Cops use Doppler. Well, radar in general is Doppler. Well, you know, dolphins use Doppler. They know if a fish is coming towards or away from them by the sound. And so what happens? What do you guys think happens on a positive Doppler shift? We have let's see, I'm going to draw the waveform here as well. Let's see, it goes like that, and then down, down. Now, apparently this guy's using continuous wave, but he can use continuous wave because he's not getting a picture of the shift. And we haven't really spoken, we've spoken about pulse wave and how pulse wave creates a picture. You need individual pulses to create an individual echo so that you know where to put that echo on the screen. And these guys aren't creating a picture, so they can actually use a continuous sound wave. Well, what happens with this wave as it's reflected back?
Does it speed up because the distance gets shorter?
Well, distance does get shorter, but does it actually speed up? Speed of sound?
No, it won't. That won't happen. But because the distance gets shorter, wouldn't the cycle get shorter for it as it's hitting that and coming back, and then it takes that average of time?
Yeah, and it sounds like you have it correct here. Let's say we have let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We'll call it 10. We have 10 waves. Oh, do I want to do it that way? Let's just draw it. Let's just draw it. Okay. So as the waves are traveling away from the police officer, they have a certain frequency. That frequency doesn't change. It's going through the air just fine. But then an object, except now let's call this object a red blood cell. So for some reason, cop is looking at red blood cells. That red blood cell is traveling towards the transducer. Actually, just for a moment, we're going to say the red blood cell is not moving at all. That'd be a little better to say this. Red blood cell is not moving at all. It's going to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's just say it's 7 megahertz, 7 hertz, whatever. It sees 7 hertz. And in fact, it reflects. It reflects 7 hertz back. If, however, our transducer is here, and we have our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we have our, dang it, why does it do that? All right. Our red blood cell's actually traveling towards the transducer. Red blood cell is going to see a higher frequency. Does that make sense why that would happen? The red blood cell.
It's like you have two trains traveling towards each other. One's at 50 miles an hour, the other's at 65.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. Another actually good way, if you've ever been to the beach and the waves are coming in, let's say one wave every second, whoosh, whoosh. But you're a kid and you are ready to run out. As you're running out into those waves, instead of those waves hitting you at 1 second intervals, as if you were standing there on the edge of the water, the waves are hitting your ankles at 1 second intervals. Whoosh, whoosh. You're a kid though, and you run into the water. Those waves are now going to hit you at faster intervals because you're going into the wave and the wave's coming at you. So that's a shift right there. That's the first shift, actually. The first shift. But wait a minute, I have a little triangle question mark right there, and I'm just going to tell you really quickly. The Doppler shift equation has a 2 in it. Here's the first one. There's got to be a second. So there's a number 2 in the Doppler equation. First, the red blood cell sees a higher frequency because it's running into the frequency. It's not waiting for every wave. It's not waiting for every wave to come at you. It's going into the waves at some speed. Considerably slower than the waves, but still it's going towards them. So it's hitting these waves faster than if it was just sitting still. So that's a higher frequency right there. But now, in essence, we have a higher frequency that it sees, but it is traveling towards the transducer. Its reflection is also at a higher frequency. So as it's coming forward, its reflection, let's do color green, hopefully we'll see it a little better. Higher frequency reflection. That's the number 2. So 1 and 2 is why we see a 2 here in the equation. First, it sees it, and you would think that would be it. But if you really think about it, and what a lot of books will say, I don't think this book says this, but I'm going to say it anyway because if other books say it, you might see it in the SPI. There's essentially two sound sources. Essentially two sound sources. One is the transducer, and 2, the red blood cell itself. Even though it really didn't produce a sound, it's reflecting a sound. So it's considered both a receiver and a producer of sound since it's reflecting. So some books use this term. Just remember that it essentially has two sound sources. So let's look at this really horrible, and you guys know how I feel about math, so I'm not happy with this either. Okay. So Doppler shift, oftentimes F subset D, like that. Doppler shift, in other words, frequency Doppler. Frequency Doppler. Remember, we're now getting a different frequency on the reflection. 2, well, we've already discussed the 2. 1, the red blood cell sees a higher frequency because it's running into the waves, and then it reflects a higher frequency because it's also it's taking that higher frequency and then reflecting it, which is kind of doubled. That's a little hard to visualize exactly why it's doubled. I usually run back and forth in the room when I'm explaining this. It sometimes makes it a little easier. We said 2 times the velocity of blood. Well, of course, if the red blood cell is traveling very fast, it's going to have a higher frequency change. Yes, makes sense. Because, well, it's up here. Anything up here is going to create more shift there. Times the transducer frequency. So it matters what frequency we use when we are scanning. And so one of the things we could do to either increase or sometimes even decrease the Doppler shift is to change our frequency. And trust me, it's like literally the last thing I would ever do. But it's possible. It's possible to do. And the cosine theta, this guy's at theta. Whoop, theta. Why does that look wrong? It doesn't matter. I pronounced it correctly, theta. Cosine theta. We're not going to worry about cosine theta right now. Just suffice it to say There's our little pulse wave Doppler. The angle between the blood flow and this guy is theta. All right. That's as far as I want to go with that. We'll deal with that in physics in a few weeks. But in any case, you can see that anything up here that is increased will end up increasing the Doppler shift. And anything that is down here, which is only one thing left, speed of sound in tissue, the propagation speed. If that goes down, yes, I got confused there for a second. I was like, wait a minute, no, what did I do? Yeah, propagation speed, although that, I'm not even gonna mention it simply because that's assumed, it's assumed C is for constant. We can't, obviously, if this goes down, the Doppler shift goes up, but that's not something we need to talk about ever, actually. Okay, so 2 times the velocity of blood, that makes sense. Transducer frequency, all right, didn't see that coming. Cosine theta, well, and there's my little, there are my wings here, my airplane wings there. That tells me what my angle is, essentially. That tells me what my cosine is. So my theta is really from the wings to that angle. That's theta. And so we want that to go up. It's a, all right, I'll leave it there. Leave it right there, Kurt. We're gonna, so as of right now, and pretty much all of this Doppler, I can't really start testing you on it until we go back and actually get to chapter 18. So you definitely need to be paying attention because this is going to help you right now, but you're not going to be tested on it right now. But so there's our Doppler shift equation, which is all well and good. But what are you going to do?
Sure.
Yeah.
So this equation that we're looking at right now for the Doppler shift, when the velocity, the transducer frequency, and theta go up, that's a positive shift.
More of a shift. I don't want to necessarily say positive because negative Doppler works the same. Velocity of blood, transducer frequency, and cosine theta, believe it or not. That's, in fact, that's why we're able to, oh, here we are. For negative values, we just simply steer the other direction. So I don't necessarily want to say negative, but yes, any of those values go up, your Doppler shift has increased.
Okay. Just so, if we're looking, as you're saying, we're changed the pulse wave, we steer it the other direction.
Mm-hmm.
Is it essentially a negative Doppler shift because the blood is now flowing away from the transducer?
Yep. This all works equally as well. Let's use my same color. It works equally as well going that direction. So either way, except what ends out happening, even though it works equally as well, and let's say you have your wave going along here, it's the same wavelength or the same, frequency as before, let's just say, but now if you're running away from those waves, like you're a little bird on the seashore and the water's coming in and you go, wow, you run away from the wave, you're actually, now on return, the return wave is actually now increased, thereby dropping the frequency. But the wow. But the frequency shift, whether it's a shift that makes a higher, so this is positive here. Positive is the same thing as saying a frequency shift up. I'm just going to use the word up just because it's easy. In other words, you go from maybe 5 million megahertz to 5 million and 5,015,000 hertz. 15,000 being in our hearing range. By the way, the Doppler shift just happens to end out that these Doppler shifts happen to be perfectly inside of our range of hearing. So so it goes from just theoretically, or just as a you know, whatever. So 5 million hertz going in, and 5 million 15, damn it. 5,015,000. Did I write that right? 5,015,000 hertz going back out. And what we end out hearing when we hear this, you know, this, we're hearing the 15,000, and the 5 million is booted. So what the computer does is that it looks at, it says, I put 5 million hertz in. What came out is 5,015,000. Well, I'm just going to subtract the 5 million because I know that's what I put in. And what am I left with? 15,000, and that's what you hear. Over on this side, this is a negative shift. And I'm just going to use the word down. So, oh my God, why did I use 15,000? All right, so 5 million in, 4 million 70. No.
975,000.
Well, you know what? In any case, I'm doing them. I shouldn't have done this. Not done this. I'll calculate. I usually think of those things first. And in any case, the negative shift would still be all things equal. Just one going forward, one going away. We'll end up with negative.
All hail the Empire, Lord Vader.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to say something.
Let me get out of this. Back in. Who did I get to use Rachel before you're able to get back? Who knows how to?
Rachel, you were able to get the host and then give it back last time, right?
That wasn't me.
I think it was Amber.
That was me. I can do it again.
Amber, okay. All right, so. Oh, no. No, I can't remember how to get out. Up your host. Let's go to self right. Now. Stop recording. Wait, that's right from.